compassion. Jesus said in Matthew 5, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." We need to know how to mourn. Narcissists don't know how to mourn unless it's their own loss. They don't know how to have compassion on others. All right, but we're switching from missionary trauma to missionary trust. There's a reason why we start out with missionary trauma, because it pulls us into the missionary scene, and like I said, it touches our concern and our compassion. But now when we switch gears, we're going to turn to another subject that is equally in urgency, that needs our attention, but it doesn't pull on our compassion. All right? What we're going to talk about today is missionary trust. I think that we could probably agree that when there is a breach of trust in one of our relationships, no matter what it is, husband and wife, parent to child, pastor to congregant, all right, business, breach of trust, there is a break in confidence, right? And the struggle is, how do I get that back? Or who do I trust next, right? So we're switching from trauma to missionary trust. The first one, in a very real way, the missionary himself is the victim. But, and I don't use that in a loose sense. Today everyone's a victim, right? And that is the forefront of progressive leftism. Yeah. There are categories of people that are victims, and they need restitution, they need vengeance, all right? That's not what I'm talking about. You don't have to respond to circumstances like a victim responds to circumstances to be a victim. You're a victim. You were victimized, right? But you don't have to play the victim card, all right? So in very real ways, missionary trauma is about missionaries who have been victimized either by circumstances or people. You mentioned the Apostle Paul in one of the earlier sessions. The Apostle Paul describes every character trait of having traumatic stress. He says we live, about himself, from peril to peril. He says the sentence of death goes with us everywhere. Listen, what he was describing was that any day that I wake up, that I'm alive, I've made it through a very real possibility that I could have died during my sleep, but now I'm facing a day where death is looming, waiting over me, all right? He describes that trauma as coming from two sources: circumstances, right, and false brethren. Yeah. He describes those false brethren as crafty, pretensive, manipulative, and he says the character trait of the church after I'm gone is to have false teachers ravage the church, and they're lovers of themselves. They're lovers of themselves. So we're looking at a category of ministers who preach the gospel in craftiness and pretense that brings trauma to those who are not who are not wolves, who are not crafty, who are honest, who are deeply spiritual, who are in essence the same category as the Apostle Paul, but those who are false brethren, false teacher, wolves if you will, everyone else considers them to be successful and magnificent, but to those who are fellow ministers, they are traumatized by them, right? So we're switching over to the fact that there are ministers who either themselves are false or, listen, their philosophies are false. And they don't know it. They should know it, but they don't. Right? Let me give you a couple illustrations. Number one, 4 years ago, as I was returning back to America from Tanzania, I was in Tanzania for 13 years, church planting missionary, evangelism, discipleship, church planting, leadership training. I read a story in the Tanzanian newspaper about a skyrise that was being built in Dar es Salaam. Skyrise. It was I don't know how many stories tall, like 20 stories tall. Big, massive structure, and they mostly build none out of steel, except for rebar inside of cement. All right. And this was a massive structure. It was going to be a beautiful building, and you're looking at it from a distance, and you're like, this takes up the landscape. And you're looking, you're like, cement. This thing is stable beyond anything. Look at the integrity of this thing. You know, if you're in engineering, I have a younger son who's going into engineering. So what happened was that there was about 20 school-age kids who were playing soccer out in the field, a good distance from this place, but there's a big dirt field area where any kid's going to come in Tanzania and play soccer. There's plenty of space there. Well, that skyrise crumbled and fell. All of it. Every one of those kids were crushed by that falling. And it also killed many people in the debris that was thrown out to the side that were living in just shanty type dwellings. No one would have looked at that structure and thought that's going to fall any minute. No one can say that. No one would say there is a possibility that there's going to be a lot of innocent people who are going to get hurt. All right? No one would even their mind. However, those who went into the decision making that built that building should have known better, because they were not using the grade of rebar that they should, and they were not using the grade of cement that they should. It would have been the natural conclusion by an objective person who had no hidden agenda to look at what was going on with that building and say, that is an unsafe structure that needs to be condemned. Except for those who had a lot to lose. All right? When we look now at the subject of the quandary of situational ethics in the building of the ministries of missionaries on the field, we have several categories of people. We have the missionaries themselves, number one, I believe, who should know better. Maybe the model of missions that they learned from college and from church was not what it should have been, all right? And they learned that. Secondly, all the other successful missionaries with ministries on the field have this philosophy of situational ethics. And they've been standing for 50 years. They've been standing for 80 years. This is the way to do things. I'm not doing anything different than what literally everyone else is doing. Right? But at the same time, there is a strong sense that from the Scripture and from the Holy Spirit and from logic and reason, that what they're doing with situational ethics is not building a spiritual ministry that's going to stand according to the standard of 1 Corinthians chapter 3. All right? They will give every proof that we are building this ministry with gold, silver, and precious stones. When in actuality, they are building with wood, hay, and stubble. And that's what I would call situational ethics. All right? Pragmatism is the cement that situational ethics is built with in a superstructure. Okay? Let me give you another illustration here. I thought about this when I was driving to Connecticut from Pennsylvania yesterday. We had a fly in the car. There I was driving. Chris was to my right. His wife Nancy was in the back seat. The fly seemed to love Nancy. All right? Nancy hated that fly. It just bothered her. And then it came up to the front seat. Chris was annoyed by the fly. But he wasn't rolling the window down and try to push it out or anything. He was just annoyed by it. Be able to land on his nose. Oh, this fly's got to be in the car. I didn't even notice it. I didn't care. I didn't care if the fly was there or not. The fly could land on my forehead. I'm still driving. I don't care. Doesn't bother me. You know why? I lived in Africa for 13 years. Have you ever heard of those fly strips that you pull out like that, and then the fly comes and then it sticks to it? We had 4 of those in our kitchen for years, and all at the same time. And they had trillions of flies on every one of them within hours or days. All right, we were counting. We wake up the next morning. That space is now filled in. That space is now filled in. Listen, the degree that ethics, morally sound standards in decision making, missionaries on the field, to some people it's not on the radar. I'm used to it. It's just the way it is. For others, it's annoying. All right? I wish it didn't have to be that. Oh, you're right, Brother Rodney, but praise God, people are getting saved. All right? To other people, they're like, roll down the window. We've got to get this thing out of here. There's no way I'm going to drive 4.5 hours to Connecticut with a fly in the car. This thing's getting out. Stop the car. Stop the car. Open all the doors. Get your AK-47 out. This fly is leaving. We're not continuing with it. We gotta get there. Not with a fly in the car, we're not. And that's the way it is with the guiding philosophy of decision making, with whether ethics is situational or in pragmatic, or if it's absolute and righteous. All right? Some people, what fly? Gets in their ear. All right? Another person, man, that's annoying. What do we? Gosh, because we have to deal with that for the rest of. At least we're going to get there. What if it was a mosquito? Would that be different? What if it was a bee? Would that be different? What if someone in the car had an allergy against bee stings? Would that be different? What is that line where you are willing to say, I'm not annoyed anymore, we need urgent action? Or say, what bee? The guy with the bee allergy? Is he going to say, well, there's no bee. What bee? See what I'm saying? All right. I don't remember what time I'm supposed to be done. Chris, what time did I say I was going to be done with this first session?
You said 12:15 would be lunch, but.
Okay, and I just got the one session. So is it 12 right now? So let's start in on some of these notes. In East African culture, you traditionally have a patriarchal society. From heads of society to the heads of family, it's the man that owns property. He's the owner of possessions. Inheritances are passed down through the name of the eldest male child. In some tribes, however, the men of that tribe are also known to be drunkards, adulterers, woman beaters. They are the ones who make irresponsible, selfish decisions with financial income of any kind. Sale of land, acquiring of property, possessions, alcohol. They set the bride price, things like that. If a wife complains, she could be beaten, her children could be disowned, herself, she can be divorced, and if you're divorced, you're not marriable again, and even prosecuted, to use a term, in that tribe. Frequently, her husband will spend all of their money that they got in, not on foods and goods to help the whole family, but mostly on alcohol, adultery, and even giving it away to extended friends and family. Right? That's the way it is in some tribes. Many families in the Kwira tribe in the Manyara region of Tanzania have all but solved this problem in recent generations. Because of the compassionate, concerned decisions of village elders, with their concern for the ill treatment of the women and the children of their own tribe. You know, these children aren't your children, the children that belong to the whole tribe. You know, it takes a village here. And because they don't want to see these children abused, abandoned, destitute, even dead, they reenacted an ancient tribal rite called Nyumba Ntobu. Nyumba Ntobu. Now, Nyumba is a Swahili word, and Tobu, I don't know what that is. It's a tribal word, probably. Nyumba just simply means house. I don't know what Ntobu means. Well, this intervention would prove to bring peace to the homes and ensure that the women worked hard, the women who worked hard and were wise with their dealings, they would have enough supplies in their home, their children would be able to go through school, and there would be no land or possessions that could be unfairly stripped away or confiscated from them from a family because of the irresponsible behavior of the husband or father. They solved the problem. Their tribe was better. They began to thrive. They began to be respected. Question is, wow, what's Nyumba Ntobu? And can we do that here in America? Well, this is Nyumba Ntobu. It's a non-sexual, same-sex union of two or more women who have children from men of their own choosing, possibly a different man for each child. So 2 women, 3 women, they enter into a contractual marriage relationship together because in their tribe, rights are secured through the covenant of marriage. I don't want a deadbeat father. I don't want my kid to have the intelligence or lack of intelligence and physical problems of that man, so I'm going to choose that man to father my child. Right? So I'm giving my child a huge benefit in life. All right? Now my next child from over there, I've been watching him for a couple of years, all right? He's come of age. I want my child to resemble that person. So so it's a non-sexual same-sex union of 2 or more women, and while they maintain strict control over their assets and land rights, they cannot be taken away from them. No man has a legal claim to the children or the property or the woman herself, and an irresponsible man can be jailed or beaten if he tries to infringe on the tribal rights of the woman. In Nyumba Ntobu, the responsible are rewarded, the irresponsible are punished. Now, if we were sitting in a room where red-flagged, what do you call them in a soccer game? referees had flags, and they would be like listening to our story like it was a soccer game, they wouldn't have enough red flags to...
Oh, you mean like a red card?
Yeah, a red card. Or in pro football, yellow flag. I ran out of yellow flags, throwing my hat on the ground. Stop! What? You're breaking the rules. Yes, you could win the game that way, but there are rules to this game. You cannot carry, you cannot carry a wide receiver into the end zone. Reaching back to when I watched the Chicago Bears play the Cincinnati Bengals, I think it was, in the 1980s, and the Refrigerator Perry on their 55-3 victory or something like that, scooped up the running back and carried him across into the end zone. Clearly, he would have made it himself, but because he broke that rule, they didn't give him that touchdown, so they earned it the next down. All right? You can't do that. Listen, who says I can't do that? That is the appeal, all right, to the fact that there are moral, absolute standards for decision making that can't be crossed. And just because I redefine them to mean something else doesn't mean that now I am following the rules. It doesn't mean that. So a couple of questions here about the Nyumba and Tobu story. Number one, how does the missionary introduce the gospel to this tribe who has solved clear, wicked traps, beating of women, the destitution of children, all because the man has irresponsible behavior that no one's holding him responsible. Now he's being held responsible. He's being held responsible. Now, generationally, children have hope. All right? But they do it through same-sex marriage with extramarital, what we would call affairs, with a number of different men. Listen, red card, yellow flag. What? It's the responsible thing to do. And we would have to step back and say, true. It's the responsible thing to do. But is it the absolute, morally correct standard of decision making that led to the responsible behavior? And you know what the women would say? Absolutely. You know what the elder men of that tribe would say? There's no doubt about it. That was the way to handle it. Right? However, you as the missionary, how would you introduce the gospel into this tribe? I put two different philosophies. Would you introduce the gospel through what some would call easy believism, or through discipleship evangelism? We're not going to talk about that right now. Number two, how does the missionary counsel believers in this tribe? Do you counsel them towards relational peace, or do you counsel them for restorative philosophy? We could talk about those terms at another time, even today, even during break or whatever. Number three, how does a missionary train leaders in this tribe? Do you capitalize on their natural talent to lead, or do you make decision making regardless of whether natural talent is there or not, concerning their proven integrity? All right, which one is going to attract more followers, more disciples, more getting the gospel spread? All right, we're down to number one. When the situation changes the ethics. Let's define some terms here and give some examples, all right? Number one, situational ethics is a term which says it is morally superior to depart from that which is normally considered morally right in order to accomplish a greater moral good, or perceived to be a greater moral good. That's situational ethics. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Let me give you some examples from our society. Our baby is going to be born with spinal bifida. It's better to abort her so she doesn't have a low quality of life. We would not normally ever consider, we believe we're pro-life. We don't believe babies should be aborted just because it's going to be easier on the parents. All right? Give a young mother, the advantage she needs so she doesn't have to miss college. We don't believe in all that. We are pro-life. God sanctions life. But our child, she's going to be born with spinal bifida. She's going to have a miserable life. All right? What happened? Okay, so this is situational ethics. We believe that ethically, this conviction, and we make all of our decisions making based on the conviction of pro-life. Anti-abortion. That's two different things, by the way. Pro-life, anti-abortion. All right? They both go together, but they're two different philosophies. One is a little better philosophy than the other. All right? You're coming through. This is the way that we make decisions. Life is precious. It's from God. All right? Here's a circumstance in which our normal standard of thought and decision making we're changing on because the circumstance is different than normal. All right? No one could accuse this young couple of being pro-abortion. They don't have that testimony. But here's a circumstance where now they would change that view. And then after that was over, they would go right back. All right? Let's keep looking. Another example. Listen, I'm honest. I believe honesty is the best policy. However, I'm not going to get the job which will provide for my family's needs unless I misrepresent myself on this resume to this job. No. I'm not going to lie, but I'm going to fill it out in a way where they are going to conclude something that's just not true about me. It's on them. They concluded that. I didn't say that. But I have misrepresented myself in a way which made it easy to conclude that. So here's the point. I would normally not do that. However, I'm going to do it in this circumstance because I can get beyond this circumstance to a greater good than I would just continue living my life. Okay, it's some examples from missions. There are three main categories where situational ethics are commonly practiced. Number one, in the culture. Honoring cultural traditions over settled biblical precepts and principles. For example, when we don't remove a church pastor who's been involved in fornication or adultery, instead, we either move him to a new location or we get him to confess before the church. He's restored. We forgive you. He promises to never do it again. And then he continues pastoring. Okay? That's a real cultural expectation in East Africa. If you don't do that, then you are harsh and you're bitter. If he is removed from, and you have not forgiven him. He asked for forgiveness, you didn't forgive, because forgiveness means you forget. And this is taught everywhere in churches. If you have not forgotten, you have not forgiven. By the way, I think that made it into East African culture in the wild, destructive fires of charismaticism. Okay, but it's cultural. One way or the other, it's been adapted by the culture. And so honoring cultural traditions over settled biblical precepts. By the way, it wasn't just introduced into East African culture, it verified tribal traditions, but now it's moved over into religion. Right? So not just cultural, but let me get back to this part in my notes. But there's another category, I got another example here. It's a morally superior. I don't know why my notes are behaving badly here. I apologize. Let me get back down here. It's morally superior to pay off government officials, speaking from a missionary's perspective, in order to obtain our missions registration so we could begin our ministry. Or we could at least hire a national to walk through the process of paying off the right people here and there in order to get my registration quicker. But listen, I'm one step away from it. I am willingly ignorant of what he has to do to get the process done. All right? So I have deniability. Well, I just didn't know. What is the missionary's philosophy? I would never bribe an official to get what I want, but I would let someone else do it for me. What is he saying? He's saying, I'm ethical, but I'm going to take advantage of someone else's. Is unethics a word? You understand, because it would be hard for a national who speaks English to say, unethics, what does that mean? But you know when I make up a word, how to parse that.
There's lack of ethics.
Yeah, lack of ethics. All right. Thank you, Dr. English Corrector.
Oh, sure.
All right. The second category is corruption. Oh, I was reading you an example under corruption. So number one is culture. That's a category for situational ethics. Number two is corruption, participating in questionable expectations or succumbing to pressures to ease the process. And then number three, conveniences. That is to use ministry building techniques that can be justified but not verified biblically. Now here's what I mean by that. Hey, listen, we've got to have a center for tribal people to be able to come to hear the Word of God. So we need to spend $50,000, which we raised, to buy property, build a building, furnish that property, buy the sound system in order for people to come to hear the gospel. Right? That's convenient. However, we want to start an independent Baptist church. Okay, well, I have a question for you. Is that reproducible by the nationals?
No.
No, it isn't. Well, okay, it's not reproducible by the nationals, but listen, we need to prime the pump. After we get the pump primed and the water's flowing, then yeah, nationals can get the water the same way we get the water. Right? Who dug the well? Who installed the pump? All right? Can they reproduce that? The answer is, well, it was necessary. It's necessary for the ministry building techniques that you have decided that you need to use. Right? That is situational ethics. Is it morally superior for us to pay national pastors so more people can hear the gospel before they die and go to hell? Remember, situational ethics is this. There is a moral standard that I depart from because there is a superior moral standard that I'm appealing to. All right? So it's moral up to this extent, but I do that which could be called immoral to get the possibility of doing something that's more moral. That is the justification that we find inside of situational ethics. Let's go to number 2. We'll just read that and then we'll stop. The guiding line of ethics. We'll give you the definition of ethics and then we'll stop. According to the Division of Ethics in Santa Clara University, the established scientific definition for applied ethics is this: a standard of right and wrong that prescribes what people ought to do, usually in terms of their rights, their obligations, benefit society, fairness, specific virtues. Ethics with a biblical worldview. This is ethics with a biblical worldview. The absolute moral standard of right and wrong that's based on the righteousness of God, understood by the revelation of God, and applied to all moral creatures of God. It's non-voluntary. I can't opt out of it. And it is not contingent on my input. Well, let's have input here. Let's decide together what that righteous standard is. It is not, listen, it's not determined by me. It's discerned by me. Okay? All right. And that leads us to a couple of questions, but we're going to stop right there.